Alrighty. Well, judging by the number of people in this room, and there still are some empty seats up near the front, so you folks in the back, feel free to come up and like defrag the room or something. But judging by this room count, I think this CSS thing is going to catch on. I think people are really going to start using this going forward. This next session, our last session before lunch, is called CSS Mojo. And in addition to talking about some kind of basic compatibility adventures that we all have to deal with, our speaker, Leslie Sommer, is also going to show us how to kind of add that dollop of special sauce, that drop of retin, as the old Certs commercials used to say. Using CSS. Leslie is a front-end developer at Yahoo, and we're very glad to have her join us today. Please say good morning to Leslie Sommer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thanks for coming. There's a lot of people. There's still some more seats in the front. My name is Leslie Sommer. I'm a front-end developer at Yahoo. I've kind of come to be known as the rounded corners maven. Kind of been stuck in that niche for a while. I was trying to break out, and then I was asked to speak at a couple conferences about rounded corners. So here I am. And that's what my mom tells people that I do. What does your daughter Leslie do? Oh, she does rounded corners and drop shadows. I do much more than that, but let's just talk about that for today. So first of all, how many of you are web designers? Raise your hand. Wow, that's a lot of you. How many of you are web developers? A lot of you too. How many of you are lucky enough to do both at the same time? Okay, great. So the first time I gave this talk was to an internal group of Yahoos, all web developers. So we weren't too kind to the designers. So I'm going to try and temper that a little. First of all, this is kind of a dramatic reenactment of a design that you might get as a developer or a design that you might do. I call this the Four Horsemen. And the reason I call this the Four Horsemen is we've got a lot going on in this one module. And I'll be referring to boxes today as modules. We have your basic rounded corner. Okay. We've got translucency, so you get to see the monkey. We have a gradient going on, and we have a glowy shadow around the whole box. So that's my Four Horsemen. So a lot of times as developers, we're asked to add these little special touches to boxes, to pages, to kind of spice things up a bit. And today, just for a couple minutes, I'm going to get on my soapbox, because I have the microphone and you don't. And I'm going to ask you to use this stuff for good and not evil. So it's really cool. It's like, hey, I got Photoshop. I'm going to use it. I'm going to put everything on there. Or, you know, I'm an expert at CSS, so I'm going to put rounded corners on everything I can find. I'm going to ask you to temper that a little. So sometimes another dramatic reenactment here. Thank you to my designer, Jamie, because I suck at Photoshop and I'd never be able to do this. Say this is a page with a bunch of modules on it, and you have content in each module. Can you tell me which is the most important module on the page? Where the user's eye is supposed to go to first? What meaning each box has? Because they all look the same. They all have the glow and the translucency and the gradient and the rounded corners. You have no idea. So if you're going to be using these techniques that I'm going to explain in coming examples, I'm going to ask you to temper it with just put it on one box or maybe two boxes. So now we know which is the most important one on the page. This could be an announcement from, you to the user saying, we're going to have a site outage later this evening because we're updating our database or whatever. This could be any form of things. I used to work on a product called 360.yahoo.com, which is a very little known social networking site that Yahoo did a couple years ago. And every single thing on that page had rounded corners, everything. And that's kind of how I became the rounded corner maven at Yahoo, not something I picked. So there were rounded corners on every box, on the nav, on every button, on almost every link had rounded corners. But we did develop something that we call the visual language, which is If it's a box that has user-generated content like a blog or a movie review or something like that, it had a green border on it. If it was a tip coming from the 360 team to the user, like, hey, update this, or the site might be out for a couple hours this evening, it came in a dark green box with heavy rounded corners. If it was just a message between two users, it was in a blue box. So users kind of got used to the idea that they could immediately pick up what was going on the site without actually having to read the content first. So I'm going to encourage y'all to use discretion when applying these techniques to your boxes. So that's my soapbox, and I will now step down from that soapbox. So first, let me tell you about the approach I took. I'm going to show you 6 examples. They all use the same markup. So the reason I did this is because I work on sites that are themable. So a user can go in and change the theme. So if a user wants a drop shadow, they can add a drop shadow. If they want translucency, they can add translucency without us having to change the markup. We just need to kind of plug in the correct CSS. It's a little easier. So that's why I kind of developed this approach. So it all uses the same markup. But before I get to the markup, let me tell you about 2 simple tricks that I use throughout that I hope a lot of you are familiar with and I will be referring to a lot. So the first one is sprites. Who's familiar with the term sprites? Okay, a few of you. It's just a cute name for basic background image manipulation. So let me find a typical sprite here. So this is one image. We have a series of icons going down, and we want to use each icon in a different context. So let's say on a UL, an unordered list. Through using just that one image and manipulating the background position, we can use these icons as bullet points. So it's a really cool technique. There's more information about it there's an article on the list apart. Yeah, I have the URL here. So I would encourage y'all to go read that article because it means less images, less HTTP requests if your images are on a different server. It's just faster. It's just a really nice little elegant solution to background images. And I use them a lot throughout this. Actually, I use them all the time. The second little simple trick is the IE6 and IE7 hacks. How many of you are familiar with the star and the underscore rules for CSS? So this is even more elegant than the sprite, in my opinion. So what I do is I build for Firefox and Safari, or mostly Firefox, and then hack for IE. Just because or filter for IE, depending on what you want to call it. Because the IE hacks are really simple, really elegant, really small. So the underscore rule, you just put an underscore before a rule like width or width. It hides the CSS property from everything except IE6. If you use the star instead of the underscore, it hides the rule from everything except IE6 and IE7. So you have 2 layers of filters going on, and it's lightweight. Some people prefer to do to kind of separate out their CSS. I do this all inline. I mean, not inline in the market, but just within my CSS instead of separating them out into 2 separate files. It's just really easy, makes for quick development. Are there any questions on how to use those? Anybody? And as I go through the examples, I think there's 6 of them, I'm going to ask for questions after each example. So start thinking. Start writing. So let's get to the markup. We have, like I said, I call boxes mod or modules. So I give every box the class mod. You typically give it an ID just for better manipulation. Then I give it a basic structure with a head, a body, and a foot. And usually the head and the foot are, you might not need them. If there's a lot of content, you probably do need them. I usually always include a body, no matter what. The head, the body, and foot are wrapped in something called mod content. So it kind of gives you an extra layer. And this this is the kind of untouchable layer. It allows you to add opacity, gradients, and stuff like that that won't affect your content. So your content will still be pretty readable. And when you apply opacity to a box, it makes everything translucent. Images, text. So if you don't want that to happen, you put your stuff in a kind of a protected layer. So that's what I've done with mod content. And now, with these highlighted sections, these I call the X hooks. This is where all the magic happens. It's very exciting. Somebody at work keeps asking me why X. He doesn't seem to accept my answer every time I give it to him. X is short for FX, like special effects. Call it whatever you want. Call it supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. I don't care. Call it whatever you want. I called it X. So, and I'm using spans. The reason I use spans is because they're the most, in my opinion, the most semantically neutral element. When you turn off CSS, they disappear if they're empty. You won't see them on the page. They go away. Bye-bye. If they're empty, screen readers won't read anything in them. They have no basic meaning. They're just wrappers. YX1 and X2, the structure is we have two separate spans. So you can do a drop shadow with one and translucency with another, and they won't affect each other. And then inside of each one, I have a child span, so X1A and X2A. These sound like code words, I know, like special rockets or something. And this gives us a little more control where we can control positioning with the parent and then maybe use the special effect on the child. So if we want to, like a drop shadow, we'll say move X1A down 6 pixels and then add the drop shadow to move X1 down 6 pixels and add the drop shadow to X1A. So these 4 spans just give us a lot of control, a lot of flexibility. It goes along with the themeability. We can use these with rounded corners. We can use these with drop shadows, translucency, gradients, whatever you want to use it with. Or you can not use them at all, which I hardly encourage, but that's a whole other thing. So let's dig into the examples. Anybody have any questions about the markup? Anyone? No? Okay. So first thing, very common, rounded corners. How many of us have to put rounded corners on a box? Oh, a lot of you. I'm sorry. My theory is as soon as this becomes easily native to the browser, as soon as you can say, rounded corner this, please, in CSS, however that would translate, nobody's going to want them anymore. It's going to be like the blink tag. You know, you used to have to use JavaScript to make stuff blink, and then you had the blink tag, and, well, we learned that was a bad idea. People eventually, I think, are going to learn that rounded corners, they're good at highlighting stuff. If they're everywhere, yeah, they add a nice little subtlety to things. I personally don't think you need them. But they're a necessary evil sometimes, especially if you want to play nice with designers. Like I said, I used to work on a site that was all rounded corners all the time, and so I kind of now have an allergy to them. So here we have a box that has rounded corners with a border and a solid background. This works best on a page background that is solid in color, because the sprite you're using is actually going to have solid outside color fill, because if it's not filled in on this outside corner, you're going to see the corner of the box, and then you've defeated the purpose of a rounded corner. Because the corner of your module will actually show through here, and I wish I had actually put an example of that up, but forgot about that. If you see it on a color background, you see this is what the image looks like. So it's something that you use on, if you're going to use it on a page that's going to change quickly or is going to be themable, you have to come up with images for every permutation, with every possible event of rounded corners, and that's kind of why I tend to discourage them, except on really special modules. So you don't have a designer who has to generate a lot of rounded corners. But the good thing is you only have one image. You have a sprite. So I'm using this one kind of S-curvy image to generate the 4 corners. And another requirement for me to make this work is it has to be scalable. I build pages that are variable in width. The modules are variable in height. Very few times you actually get a box where you know what the exact dimensions are going to be all the time, especially if people are bumping up the font on the browser. So you run into accessibility issues also when you're dealing with something like this. So the solution for this is actually it's going to work on any size box, on any size browser, which is a good thing. So we have the image, which has the solid outside. There's a slight IE6 bug. Oh, that's another soapbox thing. Let me get off track a little bit. Not everything has to look exactly the same in every browser. Who agrees? Come on, everybody raise your hand. Okay. I look at every site in Firefox, except if I'm testing. I don't care what that site looks like in IE6, one that I'm just visiting, like a new site. I don't care. So if I'm looking at my site in Firefox and the rounded corners look great, and I go to IE6 and the rounded corners are off, but they're still there, I'm going to think there's something wrong. Just turn them off. If you can't get it to work in a certain browser, turn it off for that browser. There's no rule that says it has to look the same in every browser. And if you get a call to customer service from somebody who says, you know, I looked at your site in Firefox, and it looks different than it does in IE6, and your site is still functional in both, I'd worry more about that customer washing their hands 50 times a day rather than what your site actually looks like. So be kind to yourself. Don't beat your head against these for 2 weeks like I did. Learn your lesson now, don't do it. Anyway, this one happens to work in most browsers, but there's a small IE6 problem, which is if you've set the width of your box to 300 pixels and then somehow like a long URL or a long string makes it in, IE6 has calculated that 100% or that 300 pixels, and we're setting these corners at 100% of the width. It's thinking 100% of 300 pixels, not 100% of whatever the box is. So if you have something that breaks that box width, the corners are going to kind of sit up in the middle here. You're going to get these kind of funny notches. Just something to be aware of. You might be controlling long strings on the back end with PHP. Who knows? It's something that we run into every once in a while. But typically, I don't set box widths manually. I kind of let their parents handle that width. Anyway, let's get on to the CSS. It's my little diatribe on rounded corners. So we have the module, and we're set the border and the background color. Okay, and here we have position relative z-index 0, and on mod content, which is our untouchable layer, we set the position relative and z-index 2. So we've got a gap of 1 there. I set this globally for the modules. I don't set this on a per special effect basis. I don't set it just for rounded corners or just for drop shadows. This is something I set globally for mod and mod content. So you're going to see it in every example. So we set the styling and the background color on the box, on mod. And in a couple of examples, you're going to see me do this on actually mod content instead, so on the untouchable layer. The X hooks, I have here commented which is which. We have top right, top left, bottom right, bottom left. 4 spans, 4 corners, how convenient. So every span is display block, clear both, just to get rid of any funkiness. Font size 0 is set for IE6. Oh, look, IE6 again. Because IE6 likes to set an automatic font size for any span because it's supposed to contain verbiage. So set the font size to 0 so you can play with the size of your span kindly. The height of your span is set to the size of your corner. So these happen to be 18 pixel corners. You can have 3 pixel corners, which are much more subtle. These 18 pixels. So you set the height of all the spans to 18 pixels, position them all relative, and then you set your background image. So you only set your background image once, and you're done. No repeat. You don't want corners across the whole thing because it looks funny. Then on your parent spans, your X1 and X2, width 100%. So they're going to expand to the full size of your box, full width of your box. And X1 and X2 are your right side corners, top and bottom. So they're going to overlap your border by 1 pixel, so you move them right by 1 pixel. Simple. Your child spans are just the little corners off to the left. So they're just this dude and this dude. So this is your parent span, these two, and then these are your child spans, that top and bottom. And those widths only need to be 18 pixels. So this is a modified sliding doors technique. And again, Alistapart has a great article about something called sliding doors, which is kind of the spanned manipulation, things using background positioning and width. You can expand and contract a span, and your corners will move with your box. So your left corners are set to, sorry, that should actually be 18 pixels. I used to have 3 pixels in here. So this should be 18 pixels. Your width is 18 pixels for the size of the corner. And you offset it by 2. So you make up for that right offset of 1, and then you offset it 1, and then you offset another 1. So you're offsetting by 2, left -2. Now you start messing with each individual corner on its own. So top right, your background position is going to be all the way this way, X, and at the very top. So this is where the sprite manipulation comes in. You just start messing with your background positions. Also the top one, you move up off the border, or onto the border actually. Then with the left one, we're negative positioning the background image. So this is more sprite manipulation. So you've moved this background image up to this corner. I had to figure that one out. So this sits at -36 pixels in the image. And it just moves it up. Really nice. And then we do the same with the bottom. We set it at -1. We set our background position. We position it absolutely, because right now it sits at the very top of the module. You want to position it absolutely at the bottom of the module. And then we set the background position for X2, A, so the bottom left corner. And those are your basic rounded corners. You know, there's some CSS involved, and there's one image, but it works. Any questions on that? And I might speed through these a little quickly, but everything is in the book. I'm going to post everything online eventually. In your workbooks, I have my email address at leslie@lesliesummer.com. My web address is lesliesummer.com. Really catchy. You can IM me also. Right now on lesliesummer.com, I haven't posted these yet, and all you're going to find is a haiku about CSS, a really bad haiku about CSS. I haven't touched the site in years. But I'm going to post this stuff. And another little note, if you can come up with better, more elegant, cleaner, prettier ways of doing this, please do. I encourage you to ping me, email me, ping your colleagues, whatever. Play with this stuff. And by elegant, I mean smaller in code and faster. I don't mean prettier, because the web doesn't need to be prettier. It needs to be more usable, because the end goal is usability. It's not prettiness, in my opinion. So yes, it will all go up on lesliesummer.com. So any questions about the rounded corners? OK. So let's move on to, oh, look, more rounded corners. But this time, it's on a solid background. What's the difference here? This is the sprite. And it's actually much bigger than that, but I shrunk it down just to fit. This is so it can go over a pattern background, a themable background, something that will change. You don't have to worry about the outside corners. I would encourage you not to use this kind of module everywhere on your page. Solid stuff like this, I think, is better used as kind of maybe a little pop-up bubble or a little announcement. Everywhere on the page, it kind of, in my opinion, it looks funny, but I am not a designer, so that's just opinion. So we got, it's kind of a trade-off. You have to have a bigger sprite, and the thing with a sprite like this is that you're limited in its size. Let's say this was 500 by 500. You can't have a box that goes more than 500 by 500. So you're limited by the size of the sprite. So if you want just a ginormous sprite, go ahead. It's going to be a big image, but feel free. And I will get to this little pointy tail just at the end of this example. That's actually, the little pointy tail is my favorite thing about this whole thing. Amazing what gets me excited. So the image, make sure it'll accommodate the full size of your module. And the outside edge of the corners can be transparent, so you're good there. This is the one example that won't use the magical X hooks. So you won't hear me talk about the X hooks in this one. So you can turn those off. This is actually going to use the module content, and the foot of the module. Let's see. So we'll get to the pointy tail later. Let's go through the CSS. So on the module content, the foot, and there's another element in there called foot content, which is just another little wrapper, like a paragraph or a div, whatever, within the foot. You set your sprite background image, and you position everything relative. Now, module background position. Okay, so the background position of the module. So this is the module is what contains your top right corner. Let's scroll back up to the example. So module is what takes this corner. And it's actually that whole image fills up the entire module. So the whole background image is viewable in your module. Now it's a matter of applying that same image, but with the correct corners, and offsetting it. I'm going to knock over my water. And offsetting it just a little bit, so these corners are visible outside of your module, because otherwise you're just going to have one huge image, which you don't want, I assume. So on module content, that is your top left corner. So background position 0, 0. And then we take it out of the module by 7 pixels, which is the size of our corner. So we knock it out to the left by 7 pixels. We set it to width 100%, and so 100% from 7 pixels over is going to extend until just 7 pixels here. So you've got your slidey door thing going on, and you see both your top corners. And because the image is the whole content of the div, it'll expand with the div up until when that sprite ends, the height of that image. We kind of do the same thing to the foot. We take the foot out of the module by 7 pixels to the bottom. We move it over to the right by 7 pixels. We manipulate the background position. So this is your bottom right corner, and with 100%. So we're basically doing a mirror image of what we do to the module. Foot content, I kind of forget why I added the padding, but it's in there for a good reason, and I suggest you use it. That actually might just be a content thing. I think it's just to move the content up by 7 pixels. Play around with it. See if it breaks anything. And then you move it left 7 pixels. Any questions on that corners part of it before I get into the speech bubbly part of it? Anyone? Concerns? Arguments? Debates? Yes?
What's the difference between those two?
So this background image is basically getting applied to the whole bloody module. Like the whole thing is that image. So you don't have a border or a background color being set on this box. This box looks like your sprite. And it's a matter of getting those corners to line up correctly where they expand up into the size of the sprite, if that makes sense. And the top one, you're just setting images in one tiny image, basically, in every corner of the box. So the styling on the box, which is the border and the background color, is actually applied to that box. It's not an image. So those images are only used for the corners, if that makes sense. And so the only real difference in usability is one has a border, one doesn't. One can be used on, one has to be used on a solid background. One can be used on any kind of background. Like you can't, this is almost impossible to do with a border on it. Kind of hard to explain, but there's some subtle differences where, and you can actually do, no you can't, never mind, forget that thought. So yeah, it's a matter of kind of what your conditions are, what kind of corners you need, what kind of page you're looking at, what kind of module you need. So if all your modules are going to have a border on them, best to use this one, but understand that you can't have a pattern background because this outside has to be solid. So I'd encourage you to kind of delve into it a little more with the code that I post up, play with it a little, put this on a colored or pattern background, see what the difference is. I hope that answers your question a little bit. Yeah. Question? They can be. I suck at Photoshop, and I did this myself. So actually, anti-aliasing probably wouldn't work too well. So that is a bit of a trade-off, because if you don't know what, you know, if you're dealing with a camo background or something like that, you don't know what to anti-alias it into. So you might end up with some funkiness. So it's best not to anti-alias them. I am by no means a graphics expert, kind of on the opposite end of that spectrum, graphics retard. So I did this image myself, and so it's a little bad. Anti-aliasing doesn't work too well on these, though. I have to say, that's a good question. Any other questions on these? Okay, so my little favorite part, the speech bubble thingy. So we have a little triangle here. No image used, which is always nice. I always encourage no images, but they're a necessary evil in terms of CSS and markup. So the pointy tail, as I call it, uses no images. It uses a slanted border technique, which you can, I have a URL up here. I would encourage you to read more about it. The way borders are constructed on a box in CSS is in kind of a picture frame format, so triangles, not just straight lines. So the thicker the border, kind of the bigger the triangle on every side of the box. You can use a transparent border in everything except IE6, but there is a workaround for IE6. Oh, look, IE6 again. So let's get to the tail. It's a little span. I use one of my X hooks for this. So that's where the flexibility comes in. You use it for anything. So I use X1. My personal favorite is X2A, but for no particular reason. So you take your span, you display a block, font size 0 for IE6, height 1 pixel, width 1 pixel. So that's the very point, that's the very tip of your triangle. And position it absolutely if you want. You stick this thing anywhere you want. I'm just telling you how to do a triangle with CSS, basically. I happen to apply it as a speech bubble pointy thing. You can make it into a clown hat if you want. So I position it absolutely, and to the right of the box, 15 pixels, and 15 pixels from the top. Why 15 pixels? Because that's how wide it is. And you determine the width of it by setting the left-hand border to 15 pixels with the color that you want it. So that left 15 pixel border is the triangle. So that's a left side border to a 1 pixel invisible little thing. Then, to get those angles, those triangle angles, we set the top and the bottom borders to 10 pixels. So that gives us an angle of 10 pixels. And I set them to transparent, so you can't see them. So all you get is that blue triangle. And you're done, except for IE6, where IE6 does not recognize transparent for a border color. It turns it black. defeats the purpose of your cute little speech bubbly thing or your clown hat. So for IE6, using our little underscore hack, look, there it is. I set the color to cyan. Pick a random color, magenta, whatever you want. The example I had found online was cyan, so I used cyan. So you set both the top and the bottom, what should be your transparent colors, to cyan. And then handy in IE6, or in IE, is the filter rule. So filter chroma color equals cyan, meaning filter it out. Get rid of that color. So it takes that cyan, and it just gets rid of it. So now you have transparent borders. So it's two little, very small tricks. You have your slanty border trick, and you have your get rid of the color trick. And you combine them, and you can do magic. Magical triangles. So that's my favorite thing. And yes? You can if you wanted a flat top triangle. So if you wanted a triangle that was like that, you could. So if you mess with your, right, it changes the shape. So if you mess with your border width, you can mess with the shape of these triangles. So you don't need necessarily like an isosceles triangle or a right triangle or whatever. And if you go to this site, on here somewhere, this site here, and I think it should be in the workbook, it shows you multiple examples of different angles that you can try with these borders. So you can create all sorts of shapes not using images and using CSS. It just makes life really easy. So any other questions on the little pointy tail thingy? Anybody? Okay. Drop shadows. How many of us have to do drop shadows? Anybody? How many people like drop shadows? Okay. Just kidding. So you need to have a background image or a solid background color on the box that you're going to be doing this on. Otherwise, you are going to get a bad drop shadow, like that. That's bad. Kind of pretty, but bad. So give it a solid color. Give it a border if you want. There is an IE6 issue that I will get to. And you will do the box styling on mod content instead of mod. Because the drop shadow is sliding between your content area and its parent container module. So you're going to actually put your background color and your border color on module content where your text will be. And then you manipulate the shadow behind that. So let's get to the CSS. Position relative z-index 0. For IE6, padding bottom, however big your shadow is going to be, so this is 6 pixels, which will bind the height in IE6. Why am I doing this for IE6? Because if you don't know how tall your module is, if content runs over, your module could be 300 pixels, it could be 1,000 pixels. You have no idea how big this module is going to be, or any module on a particular page. If you set the height of your drop shadow to 100%, IE6 is going to go 100% of what? You haven't told me how big this thing is. So it just kind of shrinks itself into a little thing, and you can't do anything with it. So there's a workaround, and that is for the actual shadow, you set it to some enormous number that it will never hit, 3,000 pixels for IE6. And then you hide the excess with overflow hidden, just on the Y factor. And you set the padding to 6 pixels, which allows you to get this bottom. But the problem is, height 100% extends to the top of this. So what you're going to find in IE6, which I don't have up here right now, is that you don't get the 6 pixel offset. I'm okay with that. Some designers might not be okay with that. If they're not, turn the shadow off for IE6. Nobody's going to complain, except maybe a designer. Eventually, you'll get over it. Oh no, no shadow. Or no 6 pixels. It's okay. If the user can still read the content and understand the content and go, hey, this site's really usable, you've come out ahead. Soapbox over. So we've set the styling on the module content. Here's our globals again. And then the shadow happens with just one XHook. We're just using one. And like I showed you before, it's just basically a box that's offset by 6 pixels that has a background color on it, and it's the translucency is set. So yeah, just a box. So display block, we set a background color to black. Give the shadow whatever color you want. Height 100% for all browsers except IE6. Width 100%. Somehow IE6 recognizes that one. Don't know how. Position it absolutely, so you can manipulate where it goes and it doesn't affect anything else. Move it down 6 pixels, move it over 6 pixels. Z-index -1, so it sits behind everything. And then you set the opacity. How many people don't know how to set opacity in CSS? Okay. It's super easy. For most browsers, it's opacity with a real percent or a dot percent. And for IE, it's filter out alpha opacity. It's a little more verbiage, but it's okay with that same number. So you set it anywhere between 0 and 100%. I put the star in front of the filter. It's my own personal preference. I want to make sure that only IE6 or IE is seeing this, because I never know what other browser out there might see it. It's just a preference. You don't have to put it there, but I don't want some random browser coming along and going, it has opacity, but I'm going to break it. So I make sure that only IE sees it. And that's it for a basic drop shadow. I'm going to get into a slightly more complex drop shadow, or a couple more. Any questions about the drop shadow? Anybody? Yes? Usually, what I find nowadays is most things will work for both IE7 and Firefox. So I typically only hack for IE6. If it works in IE7 and everything else, and you just want to filter for IE6, use your underscore hack. If you have to kind of manipulate both of them, but in different ways, yes, you use the star first and then the underscore second. So you hack for IE7 first and then hack for IE6 second, I guess. Because IE6 also recognizes the star hack. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions? So that's your basic drop shadow. Super easy. It's just, a lot of this stuff, it's just moving stuff around. It's just background manipulation and offsetting stuff by a bunch of pixels. Maybe you add some padding, maybe you add a margin here, but it's really just moving stuff around. And that's how I encourage you to experiment. Just take a couple boxes, start layering them on top of each other, and just start moving them around, and you'll be surprised about what you can figure out and what kind of special effects you can come up with. Yeah, it's... I once had a boss who told me, well, it's not rocket science. So, yeah, thank you. So now we have a translucent drop shadow with a translucent content area. Anybody who's into physics, this might kind of offend you a bit because you have light coming through and you have a shadow. But we're not physicists, we're designers. Damn it, Jim. So this is a little more CSS-heavy drop shadow than the previous example because we can't have this solid block of shadow behind a translucent thing. So we have to have a different approach to it. But let's first talk about the translucency. So we're, again, IE6, we're adding padding to the bottom and overflow hidden with just like with our previous drop shadow. We're styling the model content, but we're not putting a background color on it. We're leaving that transparent. But we put our border on it if you want a border. I like borders. So we use one of our X-hooks for our opacity layer. And then we're going to use a completely different X-hook for our drop shadow. Ooh, the beauty of X-hooks. Yay. So the opacity layer, display block. I set the background color on this one to white, so you get this nice whitish translucency. Set it to whatever you want. Width 100%, height 100%. Again, we're doing this kind of IE6 correction for that layer, just because it's like height of what? Position absolute, so it doesn't mess with other stuff. And then I move it up from the bottom 6 pixels because that height 100% is going to drive it below the actual module, the content of the module. Play with this a little, you'll see what I mean. And then we set the opacity. That's your opacity layer. So the reason that we do this in a separate layer rather than on module content is, like I said before, any transparency and any transparency on your actual, that you set on anything is going to make everything in that transparent. So text, images, whatever, and you don't want that because it becomes unreadable. And what's the end use? Usability. Usability. So now our shadow is actually a transparent box that just has a right border and a bottom border on it, and it gets offset. Question?
Having the transparency layer on top of the content, does that affect the ability to select it?
Yes. So this is actually behind the content. So you don't want to put a transparency layer on top of the content because you won't be able to click on anything. So all your X stuff gets slid behind your content. So you can still click on stuff, you can still highlight stuff, you can still read stuff. Yeah. Any other questions? I'm starting to run out of time, so I'm going to power through a couple of these. Like I said, the drop shadow is now a transparent box, has no styling on it except for a right border and a bottom border, which is your actual shadow. So that's set at 6 pixels. The positioning of it has to be manipulated with its parent. So X2 is the parent of the shadow, and that is moved down 6 and left 6. Because the box model funkiness that happens is if you set something to width 100%, height 100%, and then you have a 6 pixel border, it's going to be 100% plus 6 pixels. So it kind of messes with your offset a bit. So that's why I use a parent span and then use the shadow within the child span. So the offset is done in the parent X2, and the shadow is done in X2A, where I set the border to 6 pixels black, turn it off for the top and the left, width 100, height 100, IE6 again, 3,000 pixels, and then you start moving it around, and you set your opacity. So I went through that kind of quick. It's in the book. Questions? Nobody. Okay. Now, translucent drop shadows with translucent content area and a gradient. So we've got the 3 horsemen going on here. Okay? We have a drop shadow, we've got a gradient, and we've got translucency. This is exactly the same as the above example, except instead of on your translucency layer, which is X1 in this case, whatever you want to call it, instead of a background color, I'm setting a background image and repeating it. And that background image is a PNG, either a white gradient PNG that goes from bottom to top, goes from white to transparent. You can do it black, you can do any color you want. And then if it's white or black and you set the actual background color on that same layer, you get this kind of nice gradient effect. So the image isn't including the magenta, the image is including the white. And then you set this color here. And this is what it looks like with a darker one. And if you don't want it to be translucent, that's what it looks like when it's not translucent. Again, Alistapart has a good example of this, and I think I included the URL. The only gotchas is, guess what, IE6, because IE6 doesn't handle PNG alpha transparencies well, which means that you're going to get some really funky stuff going on with your PNG, turn it off for IE6. Just turn it off. Anybody have a problem with that? Anybody get a phone call from a user saying, where's my gradient? Nobody? Okay. So I just give IE6 a solid background color. That's it. That's all. That's it for your gradients with your translucency and drop shadow. Any questions on that? It's the exact same technique as above. You're just switching out a background image. Okay. Last example of the day, glowy shadow. Ooh. Everybody? Ooh. No. Okay. So here's your huge Mondo sprite. It's just a transparent box that has a glowy shadow on it. It's actually much bigger than this. I had to shrink it down a bit. So make the glow however big you want. This is really good for highlighting stuff. Don't use it on every box on your friggin' page, please. I beg, please. So IE6 issue, again, is because this is a PNG, so the glow can go over any kind of background. IE6 has the problem with PNG alpha transparencies. So either just turn off for IE6, my vote, or give IE6 a two-sided drop shadow instead. And the beauty of the X-hooks is you can manipulate it that way, is you can either use your magical X-hooks for a glow, or you can use it for a two-sided drop shadow, depending on your browser, if you combine it with your underscore hack filter. We like to call them filters at Yahoo. Hacks is a bad word for that kind of thing. So for IE6, I would encourage you just to either turn it off or or if you have a solid background, use a GIF instead. I actually have not tested this in IE6 because I tend not to use it, which is bad because I'm supposed to be testing everything in IE6. So, and the styling is set on module content instead of the module. So here's my border and a background color. And I've spelled out which corner is which corner. This one is a bit complicated, and we're kind of running out of time. I wanted to take time for questions. So on all the X-hooks, display block, set your background image. So this is one giant sprite. You only have to set that image once. Width 100%, height 100%. That's going to change for your little tiny corners, which I will get to. So X1 is your top left corner of the box. Whoops. Top left corner of the box. So these aren't rounded corners. These are just a glowy shadow. So you set your image, position everything absolute, set the z-index to -2. Forget why I did that, but it worked. Then you offset everything by the size of the glow you want. 10 pixels is a bit exaggerated in my opinion, but I've set it to 10 pixels. Go big. Bottom is at 0, and then I've set padding to accommodate its child X-hook. It's X1A. So X1 is actually this whole top edge and this corner, and I believe it's this side. So you get two sides and a corner. Its child is going to be just that little corner. So that's going to be set to 10 by 10, and it's going to be offset by 10 each way, I believe. And the same thing happens with your bottom side. So X2A, which is positioned absolutely, is going to be this the side, this bottom corner, and this bottom, and then its child is going to be this little glow right here. So you're just manipulating the position of these background images and the spans within each other. Let's see if there's anything specifically I need to address. The padding helps with kind of positioning your spans, getting them in the right place. And then you just start offsetting stuff. For your little tiny corners, you want your height and your width to 10 pixels, and that's your glow. And the cool thing about this glow is it's expandable to the size of the sprite. So I've seen a lot of PNG glows behind modules where the module height and width is set, 100 pixels high by 300 pixels wide and no bigger than that. And so their glow image is only that, is the entire background. This is a method where you kind of have a little more leeway with the size of your module. So any questions on the glow? Correct. So the actual glow is where your alpha transparency is coming through? Yeah. So this middle section is completely transparent. Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully you won't see this middle part because you'll set a style, a solid background on this. Any other questions on this? So those are the examples I have, and I hope they're useful. And like I said, use them for good instead of evil, please. And any general questions now? So we now have a few minutes for general questions. Anyone? Yes? I'm going to post these online just after. Well, these examples are actually live. The ones I have up here are actual HTML. So you'll be able to use them. Thanks, everybody.